Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me make sure I am up. I am seeing green and I am seeing myself moving and shaking. So I'm going to take it as if I am actually moving and shaking to the outside audience. And let me check my sound. Alright, levels. That's why I check my sound. That's exactly why I check my sound. Alright, so good. So I try to keep my show going between 5 and 6. So I hit my mark today. Hope everyone had a decent day today. And first, like I always try to do, I want to thank everybody who supports the channel. If you watch the video, if you like the videos, if you contribute, whatever, across the board. Thank you very much. You guys make the channel what it is. So I came across an interesting debate. I've been up all night. I'm dead tired. But I wanted to do this. And I want to do a few more videos tonight. But I definitely want to do this one. Because I thought this was damn interesting. And I don't know how much fanfare it's going to get. But I thought it was damn interesting. Goodman. So the last time I had a conversation with Goodman was on an Israeli thing. Him and I had a fundamental disagreement with his take on Israel's role in that particular part of the world. Came on the show. We had a decent debate. The world was good. And that was the last time I heard of Now, is having a conversation with Richard Spencer. And it's a damn good conversation. makes several really good points. But there are two main points that I want to talk about that he made that were extremely good. And I'm going to show it on the video. I don't know much of Richard Spencer. Like, for all intents and purposes, this is the first time I've really come across him. Listening to him in this debate is, like, it gives you a perspective of the person. I put it that way. Just based on the things that he weighs and how he weighs those things, if that makes sense. I'm going to give some debate analysis, but ultimately, I just want to show the debate. And I want to give part of it. This is not going to be the entirety of it. This may be like a part one. But there's two parts that I kind of want to talk about. And so I'm going to let those play up to that particular point with interjections in between. So this is Goodman debating Richard Spencer.
Quote, you're going into the minds of the founding fathers saying, yes, they wanted, a white nation, but you're ignoring the biggest issues like slavery, like the fact that blacks have history, fell in love with an enslaved black woman, and he had, based on DNA evidence, he fell in love with Sally Hemings. This is well known, and they were in love with each other. And Thomas Jefferson was the father of the 6 children of Sally Hemings mentioned in Jefferson's record, including Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Eston Hemings. So the first man killed in the war for independence from the British was a black man, and one of the founding fathers had children with a black woman and fell in love with a black woman. So from these two historical facts, how does one justify, well, I'll let you give your thoughts. I don't see what
your point is, actually, really. I mean, what is your point? So what? Crispus Attucks is a man who was shot by a British soldier. I've certainly heard of him before. I just quickly took a glance at Wikipedia. I think he's partially of Native American descent and African descent. So what? In terms of the Sally Hemings case, that is actually far more dubious than you are depicting it. I think you're more or less depicting what was a TV miniseries. I remember when I was in high school about this, love affair. There's actually, the DNA evidence is actually quite dubious. It's certainly not conclusive. And there's actually far more reason to believe that one of Jefferson's relations who was certainly not the man Jefferson was in terms of his intellect and demeanor and so on, is mostly, it just simply makes sense that he's most likely the father of those children. But even if it's true that Thomas Jefferson had children with a house slave, who cares? So what? Does that mean that identity doesn't exist? Does that mean that
it doesn't mean identity doesn't
be nationalist? We can't be nationalist. I mean,
No.
I could make the argument that George Washington fought on behalf of the crown in the French and Indian War. So therefore, how could he conceivably rebel against King George? I mean, it just I don't see any logical connection between those facts and what I believe.
Well, are you claiming that you would like a white nation based on American history?
That's an interesting question. So do you want me to talk about what my concept of the ethno-state is?
Well, yeah. I mean, from what I saw your debate with Sargon and Andy Worski and Styx, and you mentioned that this used to be a white nation, but you can look back at the history of the country, and it was never completely simply a white nation, and end of story. You did have
no nation is ever 101% anything. The whole point really is who comprises the core, who really defines what the American nation was. And there's no question that it wasn't just simply whites who defined the American nation. It was actually Anglo-Saxon Protestants. John Jay thanked God that God had given America, that it was this new nation, it was a rebellious nation, it was in this wilderness and frontier, but God had granted the American nation a core character. And he was actually referring to Anglo-Saxon Protestants, not just white Christians. The first Immigration Act, it was a Naturalization Act of 1790. It was for a nation that there was a people in a frontier, in a wilderness. It was a very different situation than we are in now. And it was a racially based act. Again, this is the first time that question of who are we was answered by American politicians.
Yeah, but nobody's
as white.
But I'm not.
You had to be white to become a citizen.
But I'm not debating that there was racism involved with the founding of the country. What I'm saying is, when you say "so what," the heroism of a black man who is the first person to die against the British can't be mitigated and it can't be erased, and it can't be mitigated, and it's a very important part of the history of the country. The fact that a black man,
I mean, I would be a little bit revisionist, to be honest, about this fairly new claim about Jefferson and Sally Hemings, just because these are facts. Many people dispute these facts.
No, but I mean, the first point I made though was Crispus Attucks.
Crispus Attucks is sure great. I'm not denying terrorism.
Let's say, for example, 100 years from now, you start a movement, and we'll get to that, in a little bit. But your movement starts from you, your vision, your ideology.
I have to be honest, I'm slightly unclear on, they haven't defined a space, like an arguing space. So I don't exactly, they're kind of floating. I guess that's my point. But it seems like they're floating on this idea of whether America was a white state or whether it was a white nation. Everything that he said, my thought was, so what? I don't even take it as being true, because HA is making a point that he's missing. And B, even if it is true, so what? I mean, they used to have slaves in ancient Rome. It's like, are you really going to define yourself based purely on something in the past that your standards or your moral standards have evolved beyond to some degree? or at the very least have evolved to a certain point where you look back at it with a fair amount of skepticism, or at the very least saying, hey, people don't like it when other people are racist. How about that? Things change. That's my point. In the same way that he told A.J. Goodman, so what about the other thing? Everything that he just said, even if it is true, so what? Times change. People change. Values change. The values have changed. The society has grown to accommodate the value system that has changed. There is no fixed society. I mean, these guys act like it's a fixed fucking society. It's not fixed. There is no society that stays fixed. Societies fluctuate. They grow. They change. They turn into particular things. In this particular case, the society's value system has grown. It's evolved. That's a good thing that it evolved. It's a good thing that it evolved. On the second point, HA is talking about Crispus Attucks. He's not hitting this as hard as he can. But I just want to make a point. The reason why he's saying Crispus Attucks, he's trying to get across. Look, you think you're making a case that whites were the people who were the ones who was making all the rules, who were the core identity of the society itself, and he's making the point that no, what you consider to be America, or what you consider to be understood as America, includes all of it. You can't carve out one specific thing. Carving out one specific thing makes it something else. It would not be America if it did not have all those constituent parts. You can't carve this out and say that, well, look, this was a core white country and we did X, Y, Z. Fact is, you had all sorts of people that were here. You can't write those people out of history. There's genocide of the indigenous people of the country. That's the first point. And then taking another group and putting them into bondage and slavery. I mean, I'm trying to make this point that all of these things are integral to what this country is. You can't necessarily take those things off the table in the way that he seems to be taking them off the table. Let's keep going. But I like AJ's point.
Would school children learn that the first man to fight for independence and actually die was a black man?
Sure. I mean, if it actually is true, it
is true.
Think that
Crispus Attucks, this is true.
Okay, I'll look. I haven't looked into it myself, so I'll just take it. Sure, but again, I think we might focus on people who were absolutely essential to the founding of the United States and the Revolution. And those were not black people. I think Crispus Attucks. Again, I will go read up on him. I had heard that name before I took a quick glance on Wikipedia. He seems fine, but the fact that he's black and this individual himself seem utterly dispensable to the revolution. Do you think the revolution would not have occurred if Crispus Attucks had not been the first one shot by a British soldier? No,
but I think it's very important to make the distinction that when you're trying to say that let's have a white nation and this history of this white nation is white, you have to remember also that it's not entirely white. The first man to die in defense of the nation against the British was a black man. So I think that
is a fascinating story. It's very interesting. The founding fathers wanted a white nation. And I don't think the founding fathers were white nationalist, as that term is come.
Again, even if that's true, so what? So what? It's like, give me some other useless bit of information that in no way enhances this particular conversation. So what? Like, there's all sorts of things that took place in the past. At some point, a caveman hit something in the head with a bone, and the first tool was formed. Space Odyssey. I'm just saying, all sorts of things have happened in the past. So what? What does that have to do with this conversation? I don't see what it has to do with anything. But let's keep going. And by the way, my point in this is societies change, societies grow. even if what he's saying is true, what does it have to do with the price of tea in China? It doesn't matter.
Down to us today. But there is, and I would also acknowledge that the founding fathers in seeking justification for this revolutionary new state, they actually called upon many Enlightenment ideals that, you know, you could say are left wing in a way, or at least at the foundation of the left wing. I would grant you all those things. But the fact is, the founding fathers, without any question, wanted a white nation. There was no real concept of African Americans having equal status to Anglo-Saxons on the continent. It's just simply a fact. When you look at their very first 1790 Immigration Naturalization Act, they clearly understood the United States as a white country. Throughout the 20th century, even when these things weren't made explicit, and I think they should have been made explicit.
Again, so what? Even if what you're saying is true, which I don't even grant you that, so what? What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? I guess I don't see the point in this particular argument, or this particular line of conversation. It's like you're asserting stuff that took place in the past. Okay. Thomas Jefferson went to a barber on Thursday. Okay, I get it. I understand. So what? What does that matter? I don't understand what that matters. Societies change, societies grow, societies evolve. He's acting as if societies are these fixed things. They're not. They grow and change. Let's keep going.
Everyone in the country understood what an American citizen really was. Now, there was always these two issues, and they're different ones. The first was the Indian question, the Native American question, and the second one was the Negro question. And those were very difficult issues. They did give the United States a different character, you could say. But in terms of in terms of would dominate the culture, it was never a question. And also in terms of, real quick, and I'll let you talk, in terms of the 1924 Immigration Act, the paradigm of the 1924 Immigration Act was race, period, end of statement. It was also a restrictionist act. It basically, American population had swelled, it was, and so on. But in terms of new people coming in, it was an attempt to match the 1890 census. So this has been the dominant paradigm. It's only really after 1965 that we began to think of immigration and also who we are as a nation as, it's we're no one. America is just a platform for the world. If you come here and you want to do business or whatever, you're an American. If you believe in the Constitution, you're an American. The fact is that is a pretty foreign concept.
Okay, but
the vast majority of Americans throughout history. But
here's where I have a big issue with your viewpoint. You start off, the basis of your viewpoint is, going into the minds of the founding fathers and saying, well, this is what they wanted. With Sally Hemings, for example, Thomas Jefferson fell in love with a black woman. You cannot deny that he wanted that relationship.
I can't deny that. That is really historically dubious. But even
no, wait a second. Let me finish. Okay, so he had a relationship with a black woman. If you want to go ahead and talk about what the founding fathers wanted, and pertaining to race, well, let's go ahead and do that. Not only was there a sexual relationship between Thomas Jefferson and a black woman, and it's been recorded that there was a love affair there. From 1619 to 1865, there was slavery and blacks were enslaved. The economic engine of this country, without slavery, you would not have America as a power in the 1800s. Without slavery, you would agree with that, correct?
More or less. I think
So hold on, let me just finish my point. Let me just finish my point. If we're both in agreement,
I'll grant you that point to hear what you have to say after.
Okay, so if you don't have, King Cotton was the economic engine of the South, and that's one of the big reasons the United States of America was a power in the 1800s. When you remove that factor from 1619, long before the country was founded, to 1865, you have black babies ripped apart from their mothers, sold in front of their mothers. You have husbands and wives ripped apart, families ripped apart, black families, African-American families ripped apart during slavery. The founding fathers also wanted slaves as an economic growth engine. The country benefited off this arrangement. It became a power because of 200 years of slavery. And without that, you would not have the United States as a superpower. And you also wouldn't have had the ability to go into the 20th century as a power, but that's a whole other story. But you're going into the minds of the founding fathers saying, yes, they wanted, a white nation, but you're ignoring the biggest issues like slavery, like the fact that blacks have fought in every war we've ever had, like the fact that American history is not neatly defined in terms of pure white race, and that's it. There's Native American, there's Latino, there's Asian. Yes, you can cite the Chinese Exclusion Act, but you also have to understand, you also have to credit Chinese Americans for building the railroads and their achievements. So what I'm saying to you is simply going into the minds of the founding fathers and saying, well, they wanted a white nation. Yeah, they wanted a lot of things. They also fell in love with black women, and they also enslaved black families for economic growth.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right. He's absolutely right. I mean, you have to weigh that stuff, man. You have to weigh the damage. It's like, how do you scale the damage that took place? We have all of those people who were broken up from their homes, who were dragged across the Pacific enslaved ships or Atlantic enslaved ships. How do you weigh that? Not to mention the number of Native Americans who was murdered during the time, this campaign to make America what it was. How do you weigh those things? And can you just blow those things off and say, well, yeah, they just wanted a white nation? Yeah, there's a damage associated with that. And not just there's a damage associated with it. You can't separate. You can't separate it that way. Like, America is America because of the things that have taken place in America. Like, there's no such thing as America if you take those other things out of it. It's something else. I don't know the nation that this guy is talking about. The nation that was the real nation had African Americans or Africans that were made slaves. It is Native Americans who were eventually killed and pushed out the way. Mexicans who were eventually killed and pushed out the way. I mean, how many years? 200 years of free labor. Yeah, it makes the country to some degree what it is. They built the country. I mean, be honest, call it what it is. There's no way to separate those things and say that this is a white nation. That's H.A.'s point, and H.A. is right. He's absolutely right.
Okay, I am not going into the minds of the founding fathers through telepathy or psychoanalysis. I'm actually looking at what they explicitly said. Again, this is just clear. This is not my interpretation. This is what they explicitly said. I would agree. There's no question that the America as a powerful nation in the 19th century was based on slavery. In this sense, without slavery, if we had made a radically different choice at some point, America would certainly be it would have a very different history. No question, if not a single Negro were brought to the continent, we would have had a very different history. But the real thing you have to think about is who is essential in this case. The fact, I believe America would have had, if, say, there are not a single Negro slave or a member of that race had been brought to the continent, Yes, American history would be wildly different. It would probably be a lot better. All those terrible tragedies that you mentioned about children being ripped away from their mothers would not have occurred. And I think that would have been a much better thing. But America still would have been a superpower at some point. It would have had a different history.
How does he know that? How does he know that? Richard Spencer has magic powers and mystical abilities. Yeah, I don't know how he would know that. I mean, fact is, America got a major leg up by having 200 years of free labor. And they used that free labor to grow the country. I mean, he's saying that, well, if they didn't have free labor, they would have found some sort of way to be great human beings and we'd have still been a superpower in X number of years. How do you know that? How do you know that? Let's let him keep going.
Because the essential component
my point is
blacks.
But my point is,
the essential component is whites. Whites made a...
And by the way, that line of argument does not work. There is no essential component in this. I know what he's trying to say, but there is no essential component. Fact is, you had a country that enslaved another race. It takes two. Like, both are essential components. There is no such thing as enslaving nothingness. I mean, at that point, it's not slavery, it's just nothingness. It takes two. That's my point. They're both essential components. The Native Americans that were murdered, it takes two. They didn't murder themselves. They were murdered by the people who were taken over in this case. I'm making this point that all of these things are American history. Now, his argument is, if American history didn't work out the way it worked out, then what? How do you know what it would have been? All we know is what we have. So if you're talking about American history and you're talking about the reality of American history, this is what we are. Let's let him keep going. My point is, all of those things are inextricably linked to one another. You can't separate them. You can't say, well, we were the essential component, and so we made America what America did. That's nonsense. That's nonsense.
America as a juggernaut.
But whites could not have made America without enslaving black people for.
It would have been different. I will obviously grant you that. But there are plenty of other examples of nations becoming extremely powerful without the benefit of slavery. Again, slavery was something that existed in a point of time.
He understands there are also other nations that didn't become superpowers. It's like, yeah, there are plenty of nations that became fucking awesome without slavery. And there are plenty of other nations that became not so fucking awesome without slavery. Come on, be honest. You don't know. All we know is
not some essential factor for what the United States is today. You could just as easily argue, perhaps with justification, that America would be more powerful if it had never engaged in the slave practice over the long term.
Do you think that America would be more powerful were it not? I mean, how is that even possible? You have 200. You have labor from 1619 to over 200 years of free labor, the economic output of which, I mean, we can go into, but without that free labor, without the millions and millions, so you can't just suddenly create millions and millions of white people to do what enslaved black people were doing for free.
Yeah, HA is right here. I like this line of attack that HA is doing. He's essentially saying, hey, Spencer just said something absolutely absurd. And the reason he's talking this way, and he's saying these absurd things, is because he's stuck with a particular point that he can't get past. Blacks were here. You were enslaving all of these people. You were getting free labor for 200 years. Now, he's trying to make the point and devaluing this idea of the slavery itself. HA is making the point of, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. This is the reality of what took place. Both of these things needed to be part of the process. You cannot, pull one out of this process and say it was going to be something else. You have no idea what that something else was going to be. All you know is what you have. Stop trying to devalue the thing that you have. He can't escape that particular point, and his ideology doesn't let him get around that. It's like, can't, need to devalue the slaves. Need to devalue the slaves. And then to jump the shark and say, it would have been more prosperous if we hadn't brought those darkies aboard. Okay. Let's keep going. HA's he's eating them. Eating them alive.
And so without that economic engine, there's simply no way America would be.
Slavery was was collapsing over the course of the 19th century. I am granting you this fact that America had, particularly the American South, it had a real slave economy throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. This made it powerful. Certain people benefited from it more than others. And also, I would agree with you that slavery, although it was benign in many in perhaps ways that we don't want to acknowledge, that it was a terrible institution that I don't want to repeat at all. All I'm saying is, who is the essential factor in this? Whites are the essential factor in this. I mean, if you look at places where, say, freed African slaves, say Africans who overthrew their masters, in the example of Haiti, Haiti has been a disaster of a country over the centuries. Not entirely Haitians' fault. I wouldn't say that. But the fact is,
This argument is absurd. How can I get across that this argument is absurd? Look, there is no such thing as America outside of the confines of what is taking place to make America America. Understand what I'm saying? He's trying to make this argument that if whites were elsewhere, if whites were just a thing unto themselves and they've never brought any slaves over, then those whites are not they're fundamentally different than the whites that would have been here in this country using free labor. They're different. You can't make that case. Like, you have no idea what those things would have been. Ultimately, only reality that you have is reality that you have. He's trying to make this point that, look, the whites are the indispensable quantity to this. Well, no. The whites are only what they were because they had the slaves to be what they were. You can't separate the two. You can't pull them out. There is no, one side is indispensable. No, they're both required for you to have what you're talking about. This argument doesn't fly. Let's keep going. At least I don't think it flies. Personally, I don't think it flies.
We have seen what African countries look like. You can find plenty of examples of white countries that did not engage in slavery who became juggernauts.
Yeah, but
there were not African slaves in Germany, and Germany began to challenge England.
But there wasn't a genocide in Belgium because of black Africans, but there was a genocide in the Congo because of white people and because of King Leopold. I agree. When you say, well, look at,
I think the thing that terrified me most about this, terrified is too strong. That's way hyperbolic. I guess my point is, all of these horrible things, like it's not, like the context of the conversation is dealing with identity. So that in and of itself is weird and a little strange to me, because that's purely just some conception that people are making. That's not really a real thing. It's not a real thing. It's a mental conception. It's something that's agreed upon. You can have society that's arranged in all sorts of ways. That's something that particular mind clicks into, or our particular society has arranged ourselves in this particular way. That's the first part. The second part to this is, because we're talking about identity, we're stuck with this thing of what have people of that particular identity done to other people. And it feels like he tosses that off, like, yeah, that's up. White people did bad things. And yet, the entire argument of this is how awesome white people would have been, and how this would have been a juggernaut if we didn't have these darkies on the planet, if we didn't use them for slavery and their resources, as if those things are separate and distinct from one another. They can never be separated. I just find this real. This is an interesting argument, that's all. And it's slightly disturbing how easily he throws aside all of the atrocities. I mean, honestly, you're talking about genocide in one case. You're talking about, and not to mention breaking the treaties left and right, even among the Native Americans that remained. And then in the case of blacks, you're talking about creating a societal structure that indoctrinates this idea of white superiority that fundamentally went through the years. Even at the point where slavery itself was overturned, you still ended up in a situation where one class of that society was the second class. And it was enshrined in second class from the societal structures itself, from the way the society looked at itself, and from the way it indoctrinated the people of that society, even the people of that particular second class itself, for them to acknowledge that they themselves were a second class. That's kind of internal racism of sorts. My point is, there's been some heinous shit that's been done. And if you're going to use this identity argument, you have to own that heinous shit. Tossing it to the side is a little unsettling, that's all. Let's keep going.
Countries run by black people, there's, again, you're ignoring history. The history of
I'm not ignoring
colonialism,
history
imperialism,
in the
all these
slightest
things.
bit. I'm not ignoring history in the slightest bit. I've actually granted you most of your historical points. One of the major things that made America what it was in the 19th century was the slave trade. It made it powerful, and certainly some people benefited from that more than any other.
Here's the problem. At a certain point, you end up in ideology. Meaning, I can't necessarily, it's like, how do you compete with somebody else's view of the world? Like the way he weighs things. Now, if we're having an argument on how the world should be, what the world should look like, and all that, insofar as your perception of the way the world functions, insofar as that doesn't destroy itself, meaning it's a sustainable enterprise, we can have that argument. Because if your society goes bust, then it means that your society essentially wasn't arranged correctly or wasn't arranged properly. But beyond that point, though, how do you argue ideology? I mean, we're talking about the way he weighs things. Like, H.A. can make the point. H.A. is making the point, but he doesn't care about the point that H.A. is making. H.A. is like, look, man, you guys have done some really nasty shit. I mean, aren't you going to own that? I mean, you're just going to ignore that? I mean, and he's like, no, really, no, I give you that. I grant you all of that. I grant you all of that because I don't care. I don't care. I don't weigh it in the way that you weigh it. Like, you weigh all of these things as atrocities. I weigh it as this is just the way history is. I find it to be massively unsettling. But ultimately, what they're talking about, this is an ideological debate at this point. How do you argue ideologies? The audience is just going to float to whichever side ideology as it relates to in this case. In which case, they would say either this guy wins or the other guy wins. The stuff prior, H.A. clearly, I mean, granted, I'm on the left, so yes, I'm going to be more tuned to H.A.'s arguments, but I think H.A.'s arguments are just right. So let's keep going.
All I'm saying is, I would say two things. On the whole, I think Negro slavery has been a terrible thing for the United States. It's a short term, and many people who oppose slavery, not the fanatical abolitionists who are kind of like SJWs of their age, but many Republicans, many people oppose slavery for this very reason. They thought that whites and blacks are fundamentally different. Included among those Republicans, by the way, was Abraham Lincoln. If you look at the Lincoln-Douglas debates, again, whatever you want to say about Lincoln, I'm ambivalent actually about him. But if you look at what he explicitly said, not what I'm reading into him, he explicitly said that whites and blacks are different, and that when they are put in the same political order, it is only going to result in a superiority and inferiority. In some place like Haiti,
that's not, I mean, come on, dude. That's not because there's a magical thing that makes that take place. That's a societal construct. That's you constructing a society in a particular way to create this particular dynamic. It's not natural. If you had two kids who grew up, one white, one black, in the same space, they would in no way care one iota. Those things are built in from the society itself. Those things are not necessarily inertly grown. I guess my point is, the structures of the society itself allows that particular society to propagate. And in this case, this was the ideals that they ingrained in the society. This is what the people of that particular society reacted to. They act that way because the society attenuated itself for the people to act that way, if that makes sense. I'm trying to make this point that what he's saying is not necessarily just magically happens. It happens because the society itself has configured itself to make that particular reality take place. Let's keep on. It's like he reads it as if this is, this kind of magical text of this is magically takes place. No, it's not magically takes place. It's politics. They're organizing society in a way, creating certain structures that make a particular reality take place. It's not inborn. Let's keep going.
We actually had a situation where blacks achieved superiority over whites. It was awful and bloody, and it was actually entirely.
Yeah, but you keep bringing up Haiti. I mean, an example. I mean, we've had military incursions.
Can I just finish this, and then we'll go to Haiti? I promise. So, but also, Abraham Lincoln did see the problem with slavery. He saw it from a racially informed perspective. And he was one of the major figures in the Re-colonization movement that is effectively a back to Africa movement. He was meeting with black leaders in the White House to discuss with them a back to Africa plan. If he had not been assassinated, who knows how history actually might have.
Yeah, but why would you? But why would that be? How could you tell people who have been here who've been here from day one, even before day one, whether it's black citizens, Native Americans were here before anyone from Europe, Latinos, Asian Americans. Why would anyone want to leave if this is their home?
Well, I don't know what to say. Like what happened over the course of the 18th and 19th century. When you had this move west across the continent, the sovereignty of the United States followed the movement of white people. As white people advanced it, even into some places like in the Southwest that were under hegemonic dominion of Hispanic, a different sense of that word, rule and so on, the United States was spreading as white people spread. It was a white country. Indians or Native Americans have had a very difficult relationship with whites, and they're
that's
not
accurate,
really
though.
Citizens in the way that whites and blacks actually.
But that's an inaccurate statement, Richard. It's inaccurate to say that manifest destiny proves that this is a white nation because you have 500 broken treaties with Native Americans. You have a Mexican-American war where you have California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah belong to Mexico. You still have in the history that you're talking about, which is some people in the chat room might not understand where I'm coming from, and I don't know why. Which, if they oppose your ideology, it kind of boggles my mind how they don't understand where I'm coming from. My whole point in bringing up, and I understand that you've conceded, many of my points that I made, but if you've conceded the points that I've made, and yes, you are right when you talk about what white people of European descent wanted, or what they believed to be correct. But U.S. history is, you cannot divorce U.S. history or remove the fact that it's not simply white. There are people of Native Americans, Black, Asians, Latinos who have contributed to the white history that you're talking about. I guess we've you've agreed with me on that point, but I guess
we won. I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, there are many bad things that white people did across the centuries to native peoples, to Africans, etc.
HA can never win that particular point, and understand what I mean. He can win it to a certain group. So it's like, and HA is right. I would say as a flat fact, HA is right, because look, I don't know what this mythical world is that he thinks of you know, whites without this other stuff. What we have as America is, it's a bloody history. It's a bloody, complicated history. Now, this kind of expansion, yes, it expanded. And yeah, you had these conflicts with Native Americans because you were expanding and invading into their homeland. But understand, even in your description of what is taking place, you're talking about interaction with somebody else. There is no such thing as just you, this being a white nation, regardless of whatever you called yourselves. There's no such thing. In every situation, you were engaging, interacting, killing, robbing, lying to somebody else in order to get advancement. Let's call it what it is. Let's keep going.
But the fact is, you know, we won. It seems like the argument you're making is that, and we're losing now. I would actually say that in terms of who.
But
what
is
going to define the United States? In terms of the argument, you seem to be making this argument, to the degree to which I understand you, which is that white people did some bad things. I'll concede you that, sure, and that within the rich fabric of American history, other races have been a part of it and contributed to it. Yes, I agree. But none of that means that identity doesn't exist. And none of that actually contradicts my fundamental point, which is that the white race and Anglo-Saxon Protestants in particular were the essential people. They were the indispensable people in defining the United States. The United States is only what it is or was because it was a white country that had an Anglo-Protestant core.
Well, I mean, but the thing, but
all of these people you mentioned are dispensable. You know, I don't
think that 200 years of slavery. I don't think that 500 broken treaties with Native Americans. I don't think that the achievements and the contribution of everybody from Asian Americans to Native Americans to Black Americans to Latinos. I don't think that can simply be disregarded. For example, I'll just read you this, and I guess we'll get into the modern era.
Mm-hmm.
Medal of Honor recipient jumps on grenade to save Marines in Vietnam. James Anderson Jr. was born in.
All right, they're getting away from the thread that I wanted to discuss, so I'm going to end this one here. This one has gone a little bit longer than I wanted it to go, so I'm going to end this one here. I may have one in probably 30 minutes or so. HA, good fucking job, dude. Good fucking job. Thanks, guys.